So how has the banning of most Western journalists changed the coverage and our perception of what's happening in Libya? Joining us now, Fred Francis, former national security reporter for NBC News and the co-founder of 15seconds.com. And in New York, Rachel Sklar, editor-at-large for Mediaite.com. Fred Francis, it's got to be extraordinarily difficult to report in a country where there's a shooting war going on, where you're not being allowed in. The regime considers journalists to be there illegally, and in fact, just the other day, Gaddafi said that any journalist who hadn't been given permission to come into Libya would be considered an al-Qaeda collaborator. What message did that send?
Well, I mean, this is a display by American journalists and others of the purest form of raw courage covering this kind of story. It's like going down an interstate on the wrong way at night in the opposite directions with your lights out. You just don't know crossing that desert what's going to happen, and that's what's happening. And we have Ben Wiedemann, we have Richard Engel, and some other journalists who've gone in there not really knowing what's ahead of them, and anything could happen. So it's very difficult, and we're not getting the whole story because it's so difficult.
Some newspaper journalists as well. And Fred, in the last couple of days, the regime seems to want to get some positive coverage. So some journalists were brought in for a tour of Tripoli, although it didn't turn out very well for the Gaddafi government. And Christiane Amanpour of ABC was this morning aired an interview with Gaddafi's son that obviously she'd been allowed access. So now are they suddenly worried about their image in the rest of the world?
Well, they have to let somebody in, and selectively picking Christiane Amanpour is a really good thing for them to do, the only good thing that they've done. But frankly, this is the kind of coverage that makes careers, and nobody's trying to make a career here, they're just trying to stay alive. You notice that nobody has gone from Benghazi, Ben Wiedemann or Richard Engel, to Tripoli. It's too dangerous to Tripoli.
They would like to, but at
they
the
would
moment,
like to. It's just too dangerous.
Well, I predict they will get there. Rachel Sklar, for the most part, we're not seeing journalists, even those that have gotten in, interviewing protesters in the street and providing those kind of pictures. How is the lack of that kind of video affecting the coverage in your view?
Well, there isn't that much of a lack of video, actually. People on the ground in Libya are using YouTube as a tool to get their images out. And, I've read reports of people smuggling information cards between protesters and refugees to get out of the country so that they can do it, not only uploading those images into the cloud, but actually having them transported physically. And the upshot being that they are managing to get snippets of video out and up and out into the world. So we are definitely seeing, no question, the value of YouTube.
But even with that YouTube presence, is there less of a sense, certainly compared to Egypt, of a citizen uprising, and it's being portrayed perhaps more as a civil war between two armed camps, and doesn't have any of that sort of romance that got Americans glued to their sets during the revolt in Egypt?
You know what? It's not meant to be romantic. People are dying. Gaddafi is firing on his own people. It's brutal. One of the main comments that came out about Egypt was the remarkable lack, comparatively, of violence in that situation. And, alas, like you said at the beginning, this is much darker. This is an authoritarian dictator doing everything he can to hang on to his power. This is his son saying, plan A, plan B, plan C is to live and die in Libya. I mean, there's really no other way to slice it. This isn't romantic. This is brutal authoritarian
nothing
regime.
Romantic about this. The fact is that this is going to get a lot more dangerous before it gets over for American journalism. We are going to see more bloodshed in the streets. He's not going to get it in. I remember interviewing him 20 years ago, and he was glassy-eyed at the best of times. I can't imagine the kind of situation that journalism has to face going against these people, his generals right now, trying to get into Tripoli, which of course they will try to do, as you say.
Yeah.
But it will be the most dangerous chapter in what we're seeing.
If I realized you had interviewed Gaddafi, I would have led with that.